Hello, I'm Travis Larson, and I'm an editor for Family Handyman magazine. Today I'm going to tell you how to trim this 6-panel door with this extra wide, thick Princeton casing. It'll look like $1 million when we're done. You can do it too. It's a lot easier than you think. Once you get used to it, you can trim a door like this, one side at least, in about 10 minutes. There's only a few tools that you need. The most important one is an 18-gauge trim gun. This shoots little brads ranging from 1 inch to 2 inches. And we're going to use 1-inch brads for attaching it to the door jamb, and the 2-inch longer brads for attaching the thick part of the trim through the drywall into the framing. So let's get started. The first thing that we're going to do is cut off the shims. With these really thick shims, you should score it on both sides really pretty deep. Make sure you got a nice sharp blade and cut it on this side. Couple passes, just snap it off. After you snap them off, make sure they're not projecting past the door. Otherwise, the trim is going to rock on there and you'll never get it flush on one side or the other. So we're going to start by putting the top piece of trim on, but before we do that, we have to establish where the short points of that trim are going to go. You can only get so close because of the hinges, so I always use that to define the reveal or the margin. Those are two terms that define the distance between the edge of the jamb and the edge of the trim. That gives you a lot of wiggle room when you're putting the trim on, and you can be a little bit off and it's still going to look great. A lot of amateurs make the mistake of trying to put the trim flush, which is almost impossible and doesn't look good at all. So here I go. I'm going to put my little line up here. You saw me do that. And that's about 1/4 inch. I'm going to make the same mark over here. And you can see that I've already pre-cut one side of this trim with a 45-degree angle. So I'm not going to use a tape measure at all on this door. I'm going to do it all with scribing. So I'm going to hold the short point even with my first mark. And then I'm going to work my way down here and mark the short point of this miter. Now I'm going to take this to the miter saw and sneak up on that mark, and then this piece will be ready to nail in place. So when you start cutting this miter, don't make the mistake a lot of people do with trying to get it right off the bat. Just start a little bit away from it and keep dipping the blade, moving the board this way until you get to your mark, and then make the cut. Before I do any nailing, I'm going to make sure that I cut this the right length. That's perfect, so I don't need to recut anything. Now the next thing I'm going to do is make sure that the margin between the top of the door jamb matches the margin at the short point of the miter. And then I'm going to take my 1-inch pins and blast this thing to the door. There's one more tip about this, and that is keep your pins away from the outside corners because this has a real big tendency to split if you get too close. I try to stay at least 1.5 inches away from those areas. Now that our 2-inch pins are in, we're going to nail the fat part into the framing. Now that the top piece is done, we're going to start on the sides. But just don't start cutting the long pieces of trim. The first thing you need to do is to use a test piece and check your miter. This is 45, this is 45. I'm going to hold this up here and check my margins. And then I'm going to take a good hard look at my miter. And it is open. It's open on the toe of the miter. So I'm going to take a little bit off the heel which is about a half a degree or so. I'm going to set my saw at 45.5, and I'm going to check it again. And if that's good, I'm going to cut that miter on my long piece for the side. Okay, I made a 45.5 degree cut on my test piece, and yeah, this is perfect. Now I'm going to cut the real angle on the real piece of trim. I cut a 45.5 degree angle on this thing, so I know the miter's going to be perfect, but I can't really cut it to length just by measuring. That's a big mistake. If it was carpeting, I could get away with that. I would just pull a tape measure out and cut it a 1/4 inch slower, because the carpeting is going to hide the bottom. But since this is a hardwood floor, it has to look really nice where it meets the floor. So I'm just going to flip it upside down, and I'm going to scribe the length and cut this part flat on the miter saw. So always take the pencil line, because when you scribe something, it's always going to be too long. So I just make sure I remove the line when I make this square cut. Check the fit now, the length and the miter one more time before I glue it and nail it in place. And it looks fabulous. This is ready to glue and nail. I'm going to squirt a little glue on the miter, and we're going to nail this board in place. I like to nail them from both sides if you can get at it. You can't always do that, because sometimes there's a soffit or a wall right next to the gun. So if you can only get one in here or one in here, that's fine. So nail your corner together and then work your way down the jamb, adjusting the margin as you go. Put your nails about every foot or so, that'll hold it fine. And after we do this, we're going to switch to 2-inch pins and nail the fat part to the framing. The minute you get a piece up, make sure that you wipe away the wet glue. If you leave that stuff in there, you're really going to beat yourself up with chisels or whatever it takes to get that glue out. But if you jump on it right away, it not only cleans up real easy, it also fills in all the little cracks that might be left over. So it acts as wood filler. And then when you go to paint this door, it's going to look like these two pieces of trim grew together. Perfect. We did exactly the same thing on this side as we did on that side. You can see this isn't rocket science, right? So I'm going to glue it up, nail it in place. Well, that's it. The carpenter part's done. Now it's ready for paint. If you're the guy that's painting instead of a professional, it's going to be your job to fill all the nail holes and to put a thin bead of painter's caulk around the perimeter and the inside edge where it meets the door jamb. Then when this thing's painted, it's going to look like $1,000,000.